he did work on resonator theory, and let me tell you what he said.
Okay.
Teller realized that you had to blow up a nitroglycerin. You needed a dynamite bomb to squeeze the purified uranium together to get the resonators close enough so that their energy state would reach the highest possible level, and then you'd get an atomic explosion.
Okay.
You get actually nuclear fusion.
Yes.
Now, let me tell you how that sorts out in biology.
Okay.
Now, what I've just said, let me repeat that. What I've just said is you have something that's resonating. It's vibrating like a violin string.
Yes.
And you bring all these violin strings together. And if you squeeze them together tight enough, kaboom, you get a tremendous amount of energy.
Right.
And that has to be true because we have atomic bombs and we have hydrogen bombs. Has to be true. Now, let me take you to the nucleus of the cell in biology.
Okay.
Why does a cell have a nucleus? It doesn't have to have a nuclear membrane. But what does the nuclear membrane do? It keeps all the genes, all the DNA is kept close to one another so that when DNA is vibrating, if it bangs into another DNA molecule, just like a billiard ball hitting another billiard ball, because the two billiard balls are close to one another, you get the maximum amount of transfer of energy.
Okay.
So, in other words, the principle that Edward Teller used to work up to develop the hydrogen bomb after the atom bomb that he codified, I myself perceive that in biology having to do with the idea, in other words, why is there a nuclear membrane? Because it holds these resonating genes close to one another so that they're kept at the maximum state of energy so that by whatever means, they're encouraging the production of proteins because the proteins are necessary for the cell to continue on with its life. So that's sort of the unit. To me, you're sort of saying like, well, is there universality? Is there a unifying principle?
Yeah.
And I would say from Edward Teller. Now, the guy who saw the cell nucleus was a guy named Rudolf Virchow, and Virchow remarked. He said, for some reason, in a healthy cell, the nucleus is always spherical.
Really?
And I myself think, I don't know, I haven't completely studied acoustical theory, but I think that the best shape for a theater, if you're going to listen to an orchestra, would probably be if you were inside of a sphere. I think the music would sound sweetest.
Okay. All right, so there is some sort of pre-established cohesiveness, and it seems to be, at least for a nucleus of a cell, it seems to be the spherical shape.
But why not attribute that to a supreme being?
Sure.
In other words, how could we get all this beauty without some kind of divine intervention somewhere early along in the process?
Well, yeah, and the Bible says He spoke the universe into being, into existence, which we were talking about vibration, and vibration in what's it caused by these interacting fields?
Okay.
Yeah.
Or the interaction between a particle and its medium.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. And so, and this is how he envisioned the universe. The question I'm getting at is, how are the specific shapes, brought about by this process? Maybe it's too general a question, but basically what I'm asking is, how is matter? How does matter organize itself from all of this? Number one, these fields. And organize itself.
Okay, but there are repetitive patterns.
Okay.
If you can remember the periodic table, the elements in all the columns of the periodic table, they have similar properties.
Okay.
And again, all we're saying is, well, we perceive this orientation.
Yeah,
we perceive this orientation, and then we invoke the word stability.
Okay.
So you might as well say moral virtue.
Okay.
You might as well say chastity. There's no reason not to say chastity, virtue, Christianity, heterosexuality.
Okay. Yes.
You can use all the alities and not the isms when you're describing healthy. Communism is evil, Zionism is evil, Judaism is sometimes evil.
Oh, of course it is.
But the ities, the Christianity and chastity, those terms are all good.
Yeah.
So you could invoke those. There's no reason. Let me quote what my favorite saying from Kepler. Kepler said, he wrote this on a grocery list one time. He said, when I consider in my mind the beautiful order how one thing issues out of and is derived from the next, then it is as though I had read a divine text, written not with words, but rather essential objects, saying, Man, stretch thy reason hither, that thou mayest comprehend these things. So, see, Kepler was like you if you had a PhD in physics, but you could never get a PhD in physics because a Jew wouldn't allow you to hold on to your Christianity and finish grad school.
Right.
You know, saying you couldn't do it. You would the best you would be able to come out is at least you'd have to be an atheist. And if you wanted a faculty appointment, you'd have to be a homosexual and an atheist.
Right.
See?
Okay,
you'd
so
have
in other
to
words, within nature, aside from ourselves in the domain that we exist in, within nature there are various rules. And are you saying that these, let's not call it subatomic particles, but these forms consciously obey rules, and therefore what's really holding the universe together is trustworthiness?
Well, trustworthiness could be an alternative for using the word stability.
Okay. Yes. And so what I'm getting at is there choice going on, because this is what quantum mechanics seems to be implying in many of the experiments, is that the results are counterintuitive and are often explained by saying, well, these particles are making choices. Okay. Well, what do you have to say to that?
Okay, now the way I ended up in Einstein's theory of relativity, I started studying work by a couple of guys named Hodgkin and Huxley, who were biologists.
Okay.
And they won a Nobel Prize in the early '60s, and their mathematics was kind of simple-minded. So I was working my way through their mathematics, and I came across some essays about a guy named Sir John Eccles, Eccles. Eccles won a Nobel Prize at the same time. Now, Eccles wanted to be a Christian.
Okay.
And there was a lunatic there whose name was Karl Popper. I think it's Karl Popper.
Okay.
Yeah, you would know him. He was a secular humanist and a double-minded screwball par excellence.
All right.
Yeah. And Popper used to say things like, you can't say that swans are white because you haven't seen every swan and you don't know that there isn't a black swan out there.
Okay.
So now, at the time, as everybody knows about Freud, they say, well, Freud was a cocaine addict. Everyone says that. Freud also lived with his mummy until he was 41 years old. Okay. Nobody knows about that because the Jews are keeping that secret.
Right.
But the thing about the reason the Jews parade the idea of Freud being a coke addict is because they want to legalize drugs.
Oh.
And what they're doing in biology is you cannot invoke a magnetic field. You cannot invoke a resonator theory. It all has to be in terms of biochemistry.
Okay.
Because if living creatures are all biochemical, then you can legalize drugs.
Okay, I see.
You see why that is? Because then the implication is that if living systems are all biochemical, what that means is that there's got to be a drug out there that a Jewish pharmaceutical company can make and sell.
Yeah, and make it work right.
now let's what's the argument against that? Now there's such a thing as magnetic resonance imaging, and MRIs are used to locate tumors in the human body.
Yes.
And MRIs are based on the fact that there are magnetic fields in biology.
Of course, yes.
See, so you see, Pastor. Now, when I first tried to espouse my idea of the cycloid to you, you had your skepticism. Think about your own upbringing. If somebody had told you that there was magnetism in the human body when you were a high school student, you would have walked away from them, and you would have said, "That's crazy. It's all biochemistry."
Yeah, well,
but
it was
now
taught to me, but I would not have had the skepticism of that idea, though. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, but now that we have magnetic resonance imaging that's finding tumors and also the electrocardiogram, see, that's actually how I got into this. I began to wonder what the field was like in biology, and I have an experience when I was somewhat younger. I happened to study all the properties of a cycloid. Yes. Now, I'm going to send you, when the service is over, I will send you a link where you can go to and look at all 60 curves of the cycloid at the mathematical website, and you can see that all these variants, you can look at them and see how beautiful they are. And you'll see that this is something that's just been taken out of the literature. You were only trained in the parabola, the ellipse, the straight line, and the circle. So when I say, well, heck, what about the cycloid?
Right.
That makes sense to a handful of people.
Right.
But it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, so what you're saying then is these are the puzzle pieces that make up the reality we see, feel, touch, and hear. It's these cycloids, these 60 different puzzle pieces.
That's right, but if they can be attributed properly, maybe it'll mean that magnetic resonance imaging will become sharper, and we'll start finding tumors. We'll start finding tumors when they're a quarter of an inch across instead of an inch across, and that'll save lives.
All right, and let me one more question, along these lines of the Platonic shape, because, for example, you've heard of Kirlian photography, right? And Kirlian photography shows that there are magnetic, what they call auras, around the human body, and there's even a phenomenon called a phantom limb phenomenon. If you cut a person's arm off, and you take a Kirlian photography after the arm has been cut off, the field still retains the shape of the arm that's been cut off, and often the amputee experiences sensations in the fingers which no longer are attached to the arm. Okay, so this is why this idea of Platonic forms appeals to me, and it sounds like your cycloids are the things that create these fields.
Okay, well, now that's a real beautiful lead, and let me clarify a little bit what you're saying. When you say Platonic forms, you mean polyhedra. You mean three-dimensional bodies like a cube, but with pointies sticking out of them, like tetrahedrons and octahedrons. Right. Okay, now wait. Let me tell you how beautiful it is for you to think of that. When Kepler was trying to come up with a law of the motion of the planets. He put those polyhedron. He nested them one inside of another, and he was able to find a rough correspondence between the size of the planetary orbits and the various polyhedra.
Really? Okay.
Now, that's a somewhat spurious correlation. Okay. In other words, that turned out not to be the absolutely correct way. That's not the way we're doing it now, but it was a good hunch. It was a good point of departure. It was a good hunch.
Yes.
Okay? Now, I think what I'm offering is a lot better than a hunch by saying it's this. I don't know which cycloid it's going to be, but I'm perceiving, what I'm saying is curve fit to these cycloid curves, and let's see if that'll give us information about what the intensity of the various fields. Now, let me tell you about this phantom limb stuff.
Okay.
I don't know from that. I don't have any personal experience about that, but let me tell you something that I would have dismissed. When you irradiate people in the head and the neck, if somebody has a cancer of the brain and they get radiotherapy, they will report seeing a blue light.
Yes.
When I was a medical student, I would have scratched my head and say, boy, this tumor is making this guy a little screwy.
Yeah.
But now what I would say is this patient just saw Cherenkov radiation.
Oh, okay. Which is back in your nuclear reactor, the blue field in the nuclear reactor.
Yes. So in other words, I don't know from phantom limbs and this idea of photographing auras. Quite obviously, people do have electric and magnetic fields around them.
Exactly.
But you can't make any money. You see, a pharmaceutical company cannot make a dime out of that knowledge. So there's not going to be any grants for that. But it'll be for finding tumors. But like I said, the idea that there are supernatural styles of photography, there could be something going on there. But like I'm saying, Cherenkov radiation, when a cancer patient tells you he sees blue light, he's not in a psychotic episode. He's seeing Cherenkov radiation. So I don't know what there is in other words, what you have is a manifestation that a group of people are observing, and they're saying, how do we explain this? What do we attribute it to?
Right.
And I don't know. I admit that you're sincere. I don't know what it is, and I'm just saying that by analogy, I was perfectly puzzled by a cancer patient who would tell me, well, Cherenkov, I'm seeing blue lights whenever I'm irradiated. But now it makes perfect sense to me.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. Well, this has been a very interesting dialogue that we've had, and my objective